Welcome to Soft Mystic Stories, bringing you calm, deep, and meaningful stories. The Great Pyramid contains approximately 2 to 300,000 stone blocks. Each one weighs an average of 2.5 tons. Some exceed 70 tons. According to conventional chronology, this entire structure was completed in roughly 20 years during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu. Do the mathematics. That's one block quarried, transported, lifted, and positioned every 2 to 3 minutes, continuously, day and night for 2 decades. And this assumes perfect efficiency. No mistakes, no delays, no breaks, just relentless, flawless execution at a pace that strains credibility, even with modern equipment. Tonight, we're going to examine not just how the pyramids were built, but whether the timeline, the technology, and the evidence actually support the story we've been taught. Because when you look closely at the details, when you measure the precision, when you consider what was supposedly accomplished with copper tools and wooden sledges, something doesn't add up. This isn't about dismissing Egyptian achievement. It's about asking honest questions, questions that emerge from the stone itself. The pyramid sits on the Giza Plateau, roughly 13 acres of carefully leveled bedrock. When surveyors measured the foundation in the 19th century, they discovered something remarkable. The base is leveled to within less than an inch across its entire surface. The southeastern corner sits only half an inch higher than the northwestern corner. This is extraordinary. Achieving this level of precision across 13 acres of limestone bedrock requires surveying techniques, leveling instruments, and mathematical understanding that supposedly didn't exist in 2550 BC. Modern construction with laser levels and digital theolites rarely achieves this degree of accuracy. Yet somehow, using tools we're told were primitive, Egyptian engineers created a foundation so precise that it has become a standard reference point for geodetic surveys. The blocks themselves present another problem. The average block weighs 2.5 tons. That's 5,000 pounds of solid limestone. The largest blocks, particularly those in the king's chamber, weigh up to 80 tons. These granite blocks were quarried at Aswan, over 500 m south of Giza. They had to be cut from living bedrock, transported down the Nile, moved across land, lifted to a height of over 140 feet, and positioned with such accuracy that a knife blade cannot fit between them. No mortar was used. The weight of the stone alone holds the structure together, and it is held for more than 4,500 years. Consider the logistics: 2,300, 000 blocks, 20 years, that's 115,000 blocks per year. Divided by 365 days, that's 315 blocks per day. If work occurred only during daylight, roughly 12 hours, that's more than 26 blocks per hour. More than one block every 2 minutes. This assumes a workforce that never stops, never makes errors, never encounters problems. It assumes perfect coordination across quarries, transport routes, and construction sites. It assumes no time lost to weather, to flooding, to administrative delays, to the simple human reality that massive projects involve setbacks, mistakes, and learning curves. Some researchers argue the workforce was enormous. Perhaps 100,000 laborers working in shifts, but feeding, housing, and organizing 100,000 people in the desert creates its own impossibilities. Where did the food come from? Where did they sleep? How was water supplied? How are tasks coordinated without modern communication systems? The infrastructure required to support such a workforce would itself be a monumental achievement. Yet, we find almost no archaeological evidence of settlements, barracks, or supply chains on the scale necessary. We find workers' villages, yes, but they're small. They suggest a few thousand laborers, not hundreds of thousands, and a few thousand people cannot move 300,000 blocks in 20 years, not at the speed required, not with the precision achieved. The conventional explanation relies on ramps, massive earthen ramps, that spiral around the pyramid or approach from one side, allowing workers to drag blocks upward, using ropes and sledges. But the mathematics of ramps create their own problems. to reach the pyramid's apex at 481 feet, with a manageable incline, say 10%. The ramp would need to be nearly a mile long. The volume of material required to build such a ramp would exceed the volume of the pyramid itself, and once the pyramid was complete, the ramp would need to be dismantled and removed, leaving no trace. Some researchers suggest internal ramps spiraling upward within the pyramid structure, but internal ramps leave voids, require structural support, and complicate the precise positioning of blocks. No evidence of such ramps has been found. No chambers, no passages, no filled-in voids that suggest ramp systems existed within the structure. Ground-penetrating radar has been used. Thermal imaging has been employed. The pyramid has been studied from every angle, and no ramp system, internal or external, has been definitively identified. So if ramps don't fully explain the construction, what does? Some researchers point to levers, counterweights, and lifting devices, but again, the scale creates problems. A 70-ton block cannot be lifted by wooden levers. Wood splinters under such weight, ropes fray. Counterweight systems require massive support structures. Foundations capable of handling enormous stress and engineering knowledge that surpasses what we attribute to the Fourth Dynasty. Others suggest water-based methods, floating blocks on canals, using yansi to reduce the effort required. But Giza sits on a plateau above the Nile's floodline. Bringing water to the site in quantities sufficient to float multi-ton blocks would require infrastructure. We have no evidence of channels, reservoirs, sloughs, all of which would leave traces in the bedrock, and such traces are absent. The tools add another layer of mystery. The conventional narrative states that the Egyptians used copper tools, copper saws, copper chisels, copper drills. Copper is a soft metal. It's useful for cutting wood, for shaping softer stones like limestone, but it struggles with harder materials, granite, basalted diorite. These stones are significantly harder than copper, yet the Great Pyramid's king's chamber is lined with granite. The sarcophagus is carved from a single block of granite. The precision of the cuts, the smoothness of the surfaces, the accuracy of the angles, all of this suggests tools far more advanced than copper. Experimental archaeology has tried to replicate these cuts. Modern researchers using reconstructed copper tools and abrasive sand have attempted to drill into granite at the speed and precision visible in ancient Egyptian work. The results are inconclusive. The process is slow, extraordinarily labor, and does not produce the same level of finish. The drill holes in the king's chamber show spiral grooves that suggest rapid controlled bore-in. Some grooves indicate the drill advanced nearly 1/10 of an inch per rotation. Modern drills using diamond-tipped bits and mechanical pressure achieve similar rates. Copper tools with sand abrasives do not. This brings us to the question of knowledge. To build a great pyramid requires more than labor and determination. It requires mathematics. The structure encodes the value of pi. The ratio of the pyramid's height to the perimeter's height to the perimeter of its base approximates 2 pi, accurate to several decim. Our places, pi is the constant that defines the relationship between a circle's circumference and its diameter. It's a fundamental principle of geometry. The Greeks, particularly Archimedes, would calculate pi with remarkable accuracy in the 3rd century BC, nearly 2,000 years after the pyramid was built. Yet, the pyramid reflects this knowledge embedded in its proportions. Some argue this is coincidence, that the builders simply chose aesthetically pleasing ratios, and the mathematical relationship emerged by accident. But the precision of the encoding, combined with the pyramid's other geometric features, suggests intentionality. Whoever designed this structure understood advanced mathematics. The pyramid also encodes the Earth's dimensions. The perimeter of the base, when multiplied by 43, is 200, approximates the Earth's circumference at the equator. The height, when multiplied by the same factor, approximates the Earth's polar radius. The number 43, the 200, is not arbitrary. It's derived from the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of of Earth's axis that takes 25,020 years to complete one full cycle. Divide that cycle by 600 and you get 43.2. Multiply by 1 and you reach 43,200. This is sophisticated knowledge. It requires long-term astronomical observation, understanding of celestial mechanics, and mathematical ability that supposedly did not exist in the ancient world. Yet, it's there built into the structure, waiting for anyone with the tools to measure it. The alignment of the pyramid adds another dimension. The structure is oriented to the cardinal directions with extraordinary precision. The northern face deviates from true north by just 3 arc minutes, or 120 of a single degree. This accuracy surpasses most modern buildings. Achieving it requires astronomical observation and careful calculation. True north is not the same as magnetic north. Magnetic north shifts over time due to changes in the Earth's magnetic field. True north is fixed, determined by the planet's axis of rotation. To find true north, you must observe the stars, particularly the circumpolar stars that never set below the horizon. You track their movement, mark their positions, and bisect the arc of their rotation. This process demands time, clear weather, precision instruments, and mathematical ability. The Egyptians supposedly accomplished this using only their eyes and simple tools. Yet, the result rivals modern engineering. The interior of the pyramid presents its own mysteries. The king's chamber sits at the heart of the structure, roughly 140 feet above ground level. The chamber is constructed from massive granite blocks, each weighing tens of tons. Above the chamber, 5 layers of granite beams form relieving chambers designed to distribute the weight of the stone above and prevent collapse. These beams are among the largest in the entire structure. Some weigh 50 to 70 tons. They positioned with such precision that the chamber has remained stable for over 400. No cracks, no subsidence, no structural failure. The engineering knowledge required to design this system to calculate the stress distribution to ensure long-term stability far exceeds what we attribute to early dynastic Egypt. The passages within the pyramid also raise questions. The descending passage slopes downward at a precise angle of 26 degrees. The ascending passage rises at the same angle. The Grand Gallery, one of the most impressive internal features, rises at 26 degrees as well, its cobbled ceiling creating a space that is both functional and architectural. Remarkable, the alignment of these passages is not random. The descending passage, when extended, points toward the pole star as it appeared in the sky, circa 2500 BC. This is not approximate. This is exact. The passage serves as a kind of telescope framing the star with precision. Why? What purpose does this serve? The conventional answer is ritual. The pharaoh's soul was believed to ascend to the stars. The passage facilitated this journey. But ritual does not require such obsessive accuracy. Ritual can be symbolic, approximate. This is something else. This is precision that suggests measurement, calibration, and purpose beyond symbolism. Then there is the question of the workforce. Where did they come from? How were they organized? What motivated them? The traditional narrative suggests corv labor, a system where citizens contributed work to the state as a form of taxation. During the Nile's flood season, when agricultural work was impossible, farmers would join construction projects. This system makes sense for smaller endeavors, local temples, irrigation canals, administrative buildings. But the Great Pyramid is not a small endeavor. It is a project of staggering scale, requiring specialized knowledge, skilled laborers, and continuous effort across 2 decades. Farmers, no matter how motivated, do not become expert stonemasons overnight. The precision of the cuts, the accuracy of the placement, the consistency of the work, all of this suggests a trained, experienced workforce. Where did they train? What earlier projects prepared them? Before the Great Pyramid, Egypt built mastabas, simple rectangular tombs of mud, brick, and stone. These structures are functional, practical, but they are not training grounds for the techniques required at Giza. There are no intermediate projects, no half-successful pyramids that show a learning curve. The step pyramid at Saqqara, built one generation earlier, is impressive. It represents ambition and innovation, but it is not Giza. The scale is smaller. The precision is lower. The engineering is less sophisticated. The leap from the step pyramid to the Great Pyramid is not incremental. It is revolutionary. Some researchers propose that the knowledge was inherited, that the techniques used at Giza were not developed by the Fourth Dynasty, but transmitted from an earlier source. This idea challenges conventional chronology but aligns with patterns visible in the archaeological record. The most advanced Egyptian stonework is often the oldest. Early dynastic stone vessels carved from diorite and basalt display a level of craftsmanship that later periods could not match. Early dynastic statues like the diorite statue of Khafra housed in the Cairo Museum show precision and polish that later works approximate but do not surpass. This is the opposite of what we expect. Civilizations should improve over time. Skills should accumulate, technique should refine, but in Egypt, the trajectory runs backward. The oldest work is the finest, and over time the quality declines. This pattern extends beyond stonework. Later pyramids are smaller, less precise, structurally weaker. The Pyramid of Menar, built within the same dynasty as the Great Pyramid, is noticeably inferior. The blocks are smaller, the casing stones less refined. Move forward 2 centuries to the Fifth Dynasty, and the decline accelerates. Pyramids collapse internally. Rubble fill is used to maintain shape. Precision fades. By the Sixth Dynasty, pyramid construction has degraded to the point where structures built during this period are little more than mounds today. What happened? If the Fourth Dynasty possessed the knowledge to build Giza, why did their descendants lose it? Knowledge does not simply vanish. It is passed down, taught, recorded, unless the knowledge was never fully understood in the first place, unless it was inherited, applied, but not originated. In that case, when the generation that understood the techniques died, the knowledge died with them. What remained were approximations, attempts to replicate the form without grasping the principles. This brings us to the textual record. Egypt is one of the most documented civilizations in history. Scribes recorded everything: tax receipts, grain deliveries, religious rituals, medical treatments, legal disputes. Thousands of papyrus survive. The walls of tombs and temples are covered in hieroglyphic inscriptions detailing the lives, careers, and achievements of pharaohs and officials. Yet nowhere in this vast body of text is there a single document explaining how to build a pyramid. No blueprints, no engineering manuals, no step-by-step instructions for quarrying, transporting, or positioning multi-ton blocks. The silence is complete and deeply strange. The Egyptians documented the logistics of construction. The diary of Mira, discovered at Wadi al-Jaf, describes the transport of limestone blocks from the Tura quarries to Giza during Khufu's reign. It lists the number of workers, the boats used, the routes taken, but it says nothing about the design, the mathematics, or the engineering principles. It records the movement of stone, not the knowledge behind the structure. This is like finding a shipping manifest for a computer factory, but no documentation of how computers work. For smaller projects, instructions survive. Tomb construction sometimes includes notes on materials, measurements, and methods. Temple renovations are described in detail, but for the pyramids, the largest and most complex structures Egypt ever produced, there is nothing. One possibility is loss. Papyrus deteriorates. Fire, humidity, and time destroy documents. Perhaps construction manuals existed and simply did not survive. But consider what did survive. Mathematical papyri, like the Ren papyrus, dated to around 1650 BC, over 1,000 years after the pyramids, contain practical geometry problems. Medical texts, like the Edwa in Smith papyrus, preserve surgical knowledge. If pyramid construction manuals existed, if they were valued, and actively used? Why were they not copied? Why do later texts never reference them? The silence suggests that the knowledge was not written because it was not fully understood, that the Fourth Dynasty applied techniques transmitted from elsewhere, techniques they could execute but not explain in theoretical terms. Builders can follow a plan without understanding the mathematics behind it. Laborers can move stones according to instructions without grasping the engineering principles. And when the generation that designed the pyramid died, the intellectual foundation died with them. Egyptian inscriptions add another layer. Later pharaohs describe restoring pyramids, clearing sand, repairing damage to structures already ancient by their time. Khoset, son of Ramses II, earned the title the first Egyptologist for his work restoring monuments at Saqqara. His inscriptions describe these structures as already mysterious, their origins obscure even in the 13th century BC, 1,000 years after they were built. Thutmose IV, in the 15th century BC, cleared sand from the Sphinx and left an inscription describing the monument as ancient, powerful, and in need of care. These pharaohs do not claim authorship. They present themselves as custodians, preserving something they inherited. The language is revealing. If the pyramids were straightforward royal tombs built by Egyptian kings, why the humility? Why the emphasis on restoration rather than creation? One possibility is that by the New Kingdom, over 1,000 years after the pyramids were built, their true origin had faded into myth. The structures stood massive and undeniable, but the knowledge that made them possible was gone. Later, pharaohs honored them, cared for them, but could not replicate them. And rather than claim false authorship of something they could not reproduce, they positioned themselves as guardians of a sacred inheritance. The inventory stela found near the Great Pyramid, and dated to the 26th dynasty around 1660 B, contains a curious passage. It describes Khufu discovering the Sphinx and temples already present, buried in sand. According to the stela, Khufu did not build these monuments. He uncovered them. Mainstream Egyptology dismisses the stela as a later fabrication, an attempt by 26th dynasty priests to assign greater antiquity to structures whose origins were already disputed. But whether the stela is authentic or not, its existence reveals something important. By the late dynastic period, there was a tradition, a belief that the monuments of Giza predated the Fourth Dynasty, that they were inheritances, not innovations. This belief persisted into the classical era. Herodotus, the Greek historian, writing in the 5th house century BC, recorded what Egyptian priests told him about the pyramids. They spoke of Khufu and Khafra, but they also spoke of earlier ages, of rulers whose names were forgotten, of times when Egypt itself was different. The priests did not present a clear linear history. They presented layers, dynasties built upon dynasties, monuments inherited and repurposed. Knowledge, fragmentary, passed through ritual rather than record. Geological evidence complicates the timeline further. In 1991, geologist Robert Schoch examined the Sphinx enclosure and observed deep vertical erosion patterns on the limestone walls. These patterns are consistent with water erosion, not wind erosion. Wind creates horizontal striations. Water creates vertical channels. Egypt's dynastic period, beginning around 3100 BC, was arid. Rainfall was minimal. The type of erosion visible in the Sphinx enclosure requires sustained heavy rainfall over long periods. This kind of climate existed during the African humid period, roughly 9000 to 5500 BC, when the Sahara was green, lakes dotted the landscape, and the Nile flowed heavier. If the Sphinx enclosure shows erosion from this wetter period, then the stone was exposed during that era. Exposed, not buried. Carved, not untouched. This suggests the site was worked long before the Fourth Dynasty. Schoch's analysis is geological, not speculative. It is based on observable weathering patterns, climate, data, and stratigraphy. The conclusion is uncomfortable for conventional chronology, but the evidence remains. Subsurface surveys of the Giza Plateau have revealed anomalies beneath the pyramids. Ground-penetrating radar and seismic studies detect voids, chambers, and passages that do not correspond to known structures. Some of these features sit below the level of the pyramids carved into bedrock. Their purpose is unclear. Mainstream explanations suggest natural or later modifications, but some features show geometric regularity, rectangular voids, evenly spaced chambers, patterns that suggest intentional excavation. No official excavation has been conducted to verify their nature. No public records explain their origin. The features remain documented but unexplained. If the bedrock beneath Giza was modified before the Fourth Dynasty, it suggests preparation, site work, foundation leveling, activities that require planning, labor, and time. The conventional timeline compresses all of this into a few decades during Khufu's reign, but if the site was prepared earlier, perhaps thousands of years earlier, then the timeline expands. The pyramid becomes not a sudden invention, but the culmination of a long-term project. A project initiated by people whose names we do not know. This raises a fundamental question. If the Giza Plateau shows evidence of use during the African humid period, if the bedrock was modified when the climate was wetter, if the erosion patterns predate dynastic Egypt by thousands of years, then who did the work? The conventional narrative places organized civilization in Egypt, beginning around 3100 BC with the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under the first pharaohs. Before that, the region was inhabited by scattered groups, small agrarian communities, hunters and gatherers. These groups left behind tools, pottery, simple structures, but nothing that suggests the organizational capacity, the astronomical knowledge, or the engineering expertise required to prepare the Giza site. Unless our understanding of prednastic society is incomplete, unless the archaeological record has gaps, unless civilizations rose and fell before the dynasties began, leaving behind traces we have not yet recognized or have misinterpreted. Some researchers propose a lost civilization, a culture that existed during the African humid period, flourished when the Sahara was green, and vanished when the climate shifted. This culture, according to the theory, possessed advanced knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering. They prepared the Giza site. They established the alignments. They may have even begun construction. Then, as the climate changed, as the desert encroached, their civilization collapsed. What remained were fragments. Knowledge passed forward to the people who survived. The early Egyptians inherited this knowledge, preserved it, and applied it during the Fourth Dynasty. But they did not fully understand it. They could execute the plan, but they could not recreate it from scratch. And over time, as generations passed, even the inherited knowledge faded. This theory is controversial. It requires a pre-dynastic civilization capable of achievements we have not found in the archaeological record. It requires that this civilization left behind almost no cities, no extensive tool assemblages, no clear markers of its existence except the prepared bedrock and the knowledge transmitted forward. Critics argue that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, that we cannot posit a lost civilization simply because the pyramid timeline feels compressed. But the critics must also explain the evidence that does exist. The erosion patterns, the subsurface anomalies, the precision of the base leveling, the sophistication of the mathematics, the decline in quality after the Fourth Dynasty. All of this requires explanation, and the conventional narrative struggles to provide one that accounts for every detail. Let's consider the alternative. Let's assume the conventional timeline is correct, that the Great Pyramid was designed, engineered and built entirely by the Fourth Dynasty in 20 years. What does that require? It requires that a civilization emerging from millennia of simple agricultural society suddenly within a single generation developed advanced mathematics, sophisticated astronomy and engineering techniques capable of producing the most precisely constructed stone building in the ancient world. It requires that this knowledge appeared fully formed, with no visible learning curve, no failed prototypes, no intermediate projects showing gradual improvement. It requires that after this burst of brilliance, the knowledge degraded, and later dynasties spent centuries trying and failing to replicate what Khufu's architects accomplished with apparent ease. It requires that the Egyptians documented almost every aspect of their lives, except the one thing they are most famous for. It requires that later pharaohs who were not shy about claiming credit for their achievements approached the pyramids with humility and spoke of restoring rather than creating. All of this is possible. Civilization sometimes makes sudden leaps. Knowledge sometimes appears without clear precedent, but the concentration of improbabilities strains credibility. Each individual detail might be explained away, but taken together they form a pattern that suggests the fourth dynasty was not the beginning, but the inheritor, that the knowledge applied at Giza was older than the dynasty itself. The pyramid's construction remains a mystery, not because we lack theories, but because every theory has flaws. Ramps require volumes of material that exceed the pyramid itself. Internal ramps leave no trace. Lever systems cannot lift 70-ton blocks. Water methods require infrastructure we cannot find. Alien or supernatural explanations abandon evidence entirely. What remains is the uncomfortable possibility that our timeline is wrong, that human history is deeper than we recognize, that organized, knowledgeable societies existed before the first dynasties, that these societies rose, flourished, and vanished, leaving behind not cities or texts, but knowledge encoded in stone, knowledge preserved by the Egyptians, but not originated by them. This does not diminish Egypt. It elevates it. It reveals a civilization wise enough to recognize value in what it inherited, to preserve structures it could not replicate, and to honor monuments whose purpose had passed into myth. The achievement lies not in invention, but in stewardship, in maintaining continuity across millennia, in ensuring that even when understanding faded, the form endured. Consider the casing stones. Originally, the Great Pyramid was covered in polished white limestone, fitted so tightly that the surface appeared seamless. Most of these stones were stripped away over the centuries, repurposed for mosques and buildings in Cairo, but a few remain at the base, still locked in place after more than 4,500 years. Examine the joints closely. The gap between stones measures 0.5 millimeter in some places, less than the thickness of a human hair. No mortar, no adhesive, just stone against stone. Ground so flat that the fit is nearly airtight. Modern stonemasons, when shown these joints, express disbelief. Achieving this level of precision requires not just skill, but tools capable of grinding hard limestone to tolerances measured in fractions of millime. Copper tools cannot do this. Bronze tools cannot do this. Even iron tools struggle. The most likely explanation involves abrasives, perhaps sand mixed with water, used to grind surfaces until they are perfectly flat. But the time required for such work is immense. Grinding a single casing stone to the precision visible at Giza would take days, perhaps weeks. Multiply that by the thousands of casing stones that once covered the pyramid, and the timeline becomes impossible. Unless there were techniques we don't understand, unless the tools were more advanced than we assume, unless the workforce was larger and more skilled than the evidence suggests, the Tur limestone quarries located across the Nile from Giza provided the casing stones. These quarries are still visible today. The chambers carved into the hillside show where blocks were extracted. Tool marks remain on the walls. Some researchers have studied these marks, attempting to understand the methods used. The marks suggest saws, chisels, and pounding tools. But the speed of extraction implied by the pyramid's construction timeline requires industrial-scale operation. Thousands of blocks per year, each block cut, shaped, and transported across the river. Tur limestone is softer than the granite used in the king's chamber, but it is still stone. Cutting it requires effort, time, and coordination. The quarry workers had to know how to identify good stone, how to cut along natural bedding planes, how to avoid cracks and inclusions. They had to shape the blocks roughly at the quarry to reduce weight during transport. Then the blocks had to be moved to the Nile, loaded onto boats, fed across, unloaded, and transported to the construction site. Each step involves logistics, coordination, and labor. The scale of the operation rivals modern industrial projects, yet we are told it was accomplished with copper tools, wooden boats, and ropes made from papyrus or flax. The granite used in the king's chamber presents even greater challenges. Granite is one of the hardest stones available. It is composed of quartz, feldspar, and crystalline minerals that resist cutting. Modern stoneworkers use diamond-tipped saws and tungsten carbide drills to work granite. The ancient Egyptians supposedly used copper and stone. The granite blocks in the king's chamber weigh up to 80 tons. They were quarried at Aswan, over 500 m to the south. The quarries there are impressive. Unfinished obelisks lie in the bedrock, showing where ancient workers carved them free. Tool marks are visible, but the methods remain unclear. One unfinished obelisk weighs over 1,000 tons. It was partially carved from the bedrock, but abandoned when cracks appeared. The fact that it remains unfinished tells us something important. Even the ancients could not always succeed. Quarrying granite at this scale involves risk. Stone can crack unexpectedly. Inclusions can weaken the block. Weather can cause damage. The projects were not always flawless, and yet the granite in the king's chamber shows no such flaws. The blocks are perfect. The surfaces are smooth. The corners are square. The positioning is exact. This suggests not just luck, but extraordinary quality control. Every block was inspected. Every flaw was identified and rejected. Only the best stones made the journey from Aswan to Giza. Transporting 80-ton granite blocks over 500 m is a logistic nightmare. The conventional explanation involves boats. The Nile during the flood season rose high enough to bring boats closer to the quarries. Workers would load the blocks onto massive barges, float them downstream, and unload them near Giza. This makes sense in theory. Water transport is efficient for heavy loads, but the practical challenges are immense. A boat capable of carrying 80 tons must be enormous. It must be structurally sound, able to withstand the stress of such weight, without capsizing or breaking apart. Egyptian boats were made from wood, typically acacia or cedar. Cedar was imported from Lebanon. Acacia was available locally, but had limitations. Neither wood is ideal for constructing massive cargo barges. Modern engineers have attempted to recreate ancient Egyptian boat designs. Some experiments have succeeded in moving heavy stones short distances, but moving 80 tons over 500 m is a different challenge. The boat must survive the journey. It must be maneuvered through currents, shallows, and obstacles. It must be loaded and unloaded without causing damage, and this process must be repeated not once, but dozens of times. The king's chamber alone required 40 to 50 granite blocks. Each one had to be transported individually. The organizational effort required to coordinate this operation is staggering. Once the blocks reached Giza, they had to be moved from the Nile to the construction site. The distance is roughly a mile. The terrain is uneven. The blocks now on land had to be dragged, rolled, or lifted. Sledges are the most commonly proposed method. Workers would place the block on a wooden sledge, pour water on the sand to reduce friction, and pull the sledge using ropes. Experimental archaeology has shown that this method works for smaller stones. A team of several dozen men can move a 2-ton block this way, but 80 tons is a different problem. The number of men required increases exponentially. Hundreds, perhaps thousands would be needed. The ropes would have to be extraordinarily strong. The sledge would have to be extraordinarily strong. The sledge would have to be reinforced to prevent collapse under the weight, and the coordination would have to be perfect. If the block shifts, if the sledge breaks, If the ropes snap, the entire effort fails, and failures at this scale are catastrophic. An 80-ton block, once it starts moving uncontrollably, cannot be stopped. It crushes everything in its path. Lifting the blocks into position presents the final and most difficult challenge. The king's chamber sits 140 feet above ground level. The granite beams that form the ceiling are 50 to 70 tons each. They are positioned horizontally, spanning the width of the chamber. How are they lifted? Ramps could not reach this height without becoming impossibly long. Internal ramps are theoretically possible, but no evidence supports their existence. Lever systems, as mentioned earlier, cannot lift such weight. Some researchers propose counterweight systems, where the block is attached to a rope running over a pulley with a counterweight on the other end. By adding weight to the counterweight side, the block is lifted. This method works in principle, but the scale required for a 70-ton block is enormous. The counterweight would need to be equally heavy. The pulley system would need to be anchored to something capable of withstanding tremendous stress, and the precision required to position the block once lifted is extraordinary. The granite beams in the king's chamber fit together so tightly that the joints are barely visible. This level of accuracy cannot be achieved through trial and error. It requires planning, measurement, and control. Some researchers have proposed alternative theories. One suggests that the pyramid was built from the inside out with internal cores constructed first and chaotic simstones add later. Another proposes that the blocks were cast in place using a form of limestone concrete. The concrete theory is particularly controversial. It suggests that the limestone blocks are not carved but poured mixed from crushed limestone, water, and a binding agent. Proponents point to microscopic analysis showing air bubbles and irregularities consistent with casting. Critics argue that the theory does not account for the quarry marks, the tool impressions, or the natural bedding planes visible in many blocks. The debate continues, but neither theory has gained widespread acceptance. The evidence is ambiguous, open to interpretation, and complicated by the passage of time. What we are left with is a structure that should not exist according to the limitations of the tools and technology we attribute to its builders. The Great Pyramid is not just large, it is precise, it is aligned, it encodes mathematical constants. It has remained stable for over 4,500 years. It represents a concentration of knowledge, skill, and effort that exceeds anything else in the ancient world, and it appears suddenly fully formed, with no clear precedent. This is the paradox. Civilizations do not leap from simplicity to sophistication overnight. They progress through stages, they make mistakes, they build prototypes that fail, they refine techniques over generations, but the Great Pyramid shows no such process. It is not a prototype, it is not a rough draft, it is a masterpiece, and masterpieces in human history are usually the culmination of long traditions. They are built on foundations laid by earlier generations. They represent the peak of accumulated knowledge. But in the case of the Great Pyramid, the foundation is invisible. The tradition is absent. The accumulated knowledge has no clear origin. This absence is what drives alternative theories. If the conventional timeline cannot account for the pyramid's existence, then perhaps the timeline is wrong. Perhaps human history includes chapters we have not yet discovered. Perhaps civilizations rose and fell before the first dynasties, leaving behind not texts or artifacts, but knowledge. Knowledge transmitted forward, preserved by those who came after, and applied in ways that made the impossible possible. This is not a fringe idea. It is a hypothesis based on observable patterns, the decline in construction quality after the Fourth Dynasty. The textual silence surrounding pyramid engineering, the geological evidence of pre-dynastic site preparation, the astronomical and mathematical knowledge encoded in the structure. Each piece of evidence taken alone can be explained conventionally, but together they form a pattern, and patterns in science demand explanation. Let's turn to the question of purpose. Why build a pyramid at all? The conventional answer is that the pyramids are tombs, royal burial sites, designed to ensure the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife. This explanation is supported by inscriptions, sarcophagi, and religious texts that describe the pyramid as a symbol of the pharaoh's divine status. But the evidence is not as clear as it seems. No mummy has ever been found in the Great Pyramid. The sarcophagus in the king's chamber is empty. No grave goods, no equipment, no inscription identifying the occupant. Tutankhamun's tomb, discovered by Howard Carter in 1922, was filled with treasures, objects, and inscriptions. The contrast is stark. If the Great Pyramid is a tomb, why is it empty? One explanation is looting. Grave robbers have targeted Egyptian tombs for millennia. The Great Pyramid, being the most famous, would have been an obvious target. Perhaps the contents were stolen long ago. But this explanation has problems. The passages leading to the king's chamber are narrow, steep, and difficult to navigate. Removing a mummy, a sarcophagus, and thousands of pounds of grave goods through these passages would be extraordinarily difficult, and there is no historical record of such a looting. No ancient texts describe the removal of Khufu's mummy or treasures. The pyramid's interior was first entered in the 9th century AD by Arab explorers who found it empty. If it had been looted, the looting occurred long before, leaving no trace in the historical record. Another possibility is that the pyramid was never used as a tomb, that its purpose was something else, something not related to burial. This idea is controversial, but it aligns with certain features of the structure. The king's chamber, for example, is an architectural marvel, but it is also acoustically unusual. The granite walls, the hard surfaces, the rectangular shape, all create a resonant environment. Sound behaves strangely in this space. Certain frequencies amplify, others cancel out. Some researchers have conducted experiments, singing, chanting, or playing instruments in the chamber, and the results are striking. The space seems designed to enhance specific tones to create harmonic effects that are both audible and physical. If the pyramid was used for ritual, if ceremonies involved sound, chanting, or music, the king's chamber would be an ideal location. The acoustics would amplify the experience, creating an environment where sound, stone, and space converge. The Grand Gallery, another architectural feature, also suggests something beyond burial. This passage is 28 feet high, corbelled with a steep incline. It is one of the most impressive interior spaces in the pyramid, but its purpose is unclear. If the pyramid is simply a tomb, why include such a feature? Why not a simple corridor? Some researchers suggest the Grand Gallery served as a storage area for plug blocks, massive granite blocks that would seal the passage after the pharaoh's burial. But the size and design of the gallery seem excessive for this purpose. Others proposed that the gallery had a ritual function, a processional space where ceremonies were conducted. The steep incline, the height, the echoing acoustics all create a space that feels significant, purposeful, designed for something beyond mere access. The shafts leading from the king's and queen's chambers add another layer of mystery. These narrow passages run through the pyramid's core, angling upward and outward. For years, they were thought to be ventilation shafts, but recent robotic exploration has revealed that they do not exit the pyramid. They terminate in small chambers or blockages deep within the structure. If they are not ventilation shafts, what are they? One theory suggests they are astronomical, that they align with specific stars, creating a symbolic connection between the pharaoh and the heavens. This theory aligns with the pyramid's other astronomical features. The alignment to true north, the descending passage pointing to the pole star, the proportions encoding celestial knowledge. If the shafts were designed to frame specific stars at specific times, they would serve a ritual or ceremonial function. But proving this requires precise measurements, astronomical modeling, and an understanding of the night sky as it appeared 400 years ago. The work is complex, and the results are debated. The pyramid's external symbolism also suggests multiple layers of meaning. The shape itself is significant. A pyramid is a solar symbol representing the rays of the sun descending to earth. In Egyptian mythology, the pharaoh's soul ascends to join the sun god, Ra. The pyramid facilitates this journey, serving as a ramp or ladder to the heavens. But the pyramid is also a symbol of stability, of permanence, of the cosmic O, rather that the pharaoh was responsible for maintaining. By building a pyramid, the pharaoh ensured not just his own immortality, but the continued stability of Egypt itself. The pyramid was a statement, a declaration that order, knowledge, and divine power were intact. This symbolic function may have been as important as any practical purpose. The pyramid did not need to house a body to fulfill its role. It simply needed to exist, to stand, to endure, and in that endurance to carry forward the message that Egypt and the knowledge it represented would not be forgotten. But if the pyramid's primary purpose was symbolic, why the obsessive precision? Why align to true north within 3 arc minutes? Why encode pi? Why use granite in the king's chamber? Symbolism does not require such exactness. A less precise pyramid would serve the same symbolic function. The precision suggests that accuracy mattered for reasons beyond symbolism, that the structure was designed to meet specific criteria to achieve specific goals that required mathematical and astronomical knowledge. Some researchers proposed that the pyramid served as an observatory, a tool for tracking celestial movements, measuring time, and encoding astronomical data. The passages, the chambers, the alignments all serve this function. The pyramid becomes not just a monument, but an instrument, a machine for observing the sky. This theory is appealing. It explains the precision. It explains the astronomical alignments. It explains why the structure needed to be so carefully designed and built. But it raises new questions. If the pyramid is an observatory, why is it sealed? Observatories require openness, access to the sky, clear sight lines. The pyramid's interior is enclosed, dark, inaccessible. The descending passage frames the pole star. Yes, but only during a brief period when the passage is open. Once sealed, the pyramid cannot function as an observatory. Another theory suggests the pyramid served as a geodetic marker. The structure's location at 30 degrees north latitude is mathematically significant. Its position corresponds to the center of the Earth's land mass. Its dimensions, when scaled, reflect the Earth's proportions. Some researchers propose that the pyramid was part of a global network, a system of markers that encoded geographic knowledge. This theory is highly speculative. It requires that the pyramid's builders understood the Earth's shape, size, and geography at a level that supposedly did not exist until modern times. It requires that other structures in other parts of the world were built as part of the same system. And evidence for such a network is sparse. There are ancient structures in South America, in Asia, in Europe that show sophisticated astronomical and mathematical knowledge. But linking them into a coherent global system is a leap that many archaeologists are unwilling to make without more evidence. What we are left with is uncertainty. The Great Pyramid may have been a tomb. It may have been a tomb. It may have been an observatory, a geodetic marker, an acoustic chamber, or something else entirely. The structure is large enough, complex enough, and precise enough to serve multiple functions simultaneously, and perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the pyramid was designed to operate on multiple levels, to serve as a tomb, yes, but also as a symbol, a monument, an encoded message, a demonstration of knowledge, and a testament to the power and sophistication of its builders. In this reading, the pyramid becomes a multifaceted achievement, a structure that defies simple categorization, a work of art, science, and engineering so advanced that even after 500 years, we struggle to fully understand it. The broader context of Egyptian monumentalism adds perspective. The pyramids did not exist in isolation. They were part of a larger complex: temples, causeways, smaller pyramids, statues, and administrative buildings. These structures taken together formed a sacred landscape, a space dedicated to the divine, to the pharaoh's eternal presence, and to the rituals that ensured cosmic order. The Giza complex includes 3 large pyramids associated with Khufu, Khafra, and Manare. Each pyramid is accompanied by smaller satellite pyramids thought to be for queens or royal family members. There are morti temples where rituals were performed, causeways, raised stone pathways connecting the pyramids to valley temples near the Nile, and the Sphinx, the massive limestone statue with the body of a lion and the head of a pharaoh guarding the approach to the complex. All of this was built, maintained, and used over many generations. The effort involved is staggering, not just the pyramids themselves, but the entire infrastructure supporting them. The Sphinx deserves particular attention. It is carved from a single ridge of limestone, part of the bedrock of the Giza Plateau. The body is massive, over 240 feet long. The head, much smaller in proportion, is thought to represent Khafre, though this is debated. The Sphinx faces east toward the rising sun. Its purpose is unclear, but its symbolism is powerful. A guardian, a symbol of strength, a representation of the pharaoh's eternal watchfulness. But like the pyramids, the Sphinx raises questions. The erosion patterns, as mentioned earlier, suggest exposure to water. The body shows deep vertical channels, weathering inconsistent with the arid climate of dynastic Egypt. Geologist Robert Schoch's analysis suggests the Sphinx may be far older than conventionally thought, possibly carved during the African humid. If true, this makes the Sphinx not a contemporary of the pyramids, but a predecessor, a monument that existed before the 4th dynasty, already ancient when Khafre rose to power. The Egyptians may have restored it, maintained it, even recarved the head to represent their own rulers, but the core of the structure, the body, the bedrock carving may be thousands of years older. This possibility aligns with other evidence. The proportions of the Sphinx are unusual. The head is small relative to the body. Some researchers suggest the head was originally larger, perhaps representing a lion, and was later recarved into a human face. This would explain the disproportionate size. It would also suggest that the original Sphinx was not a royal statue, but something else, a purely symbolic figure, perhaps tied to solar or Leonine mythology. Lions are associated with the sun. In many ancient cultures, the Sphinx facing east could represent the sun rising on the horizon, a symbol of rebirth, renewal, and the eternal cycle of time. If the Sphinx was carved during the African humid period, it would have stood in a very different landscape, green, wet, populated by animals that no longer inhabit the region. The people who carved it would have been part of a culture we know almost nothing about, a culture that possessed the organizational capacity, the artistic vision, and the technical skill to create a monument of such scale. The question of who these people were remains unanswered. Conventional archaeology identifies prenastic Egyptians as small agrarian communities scattered along the Nile, living in simple structures producing pottery, tools, and basic art. These communities eventually coalesced into larger political units, leading to the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt around 3100 BC. But this narrative assumes a steady linear progression from simplicity to complexity. It does not account for the possibility that earlier, more sophisticated cultures exist and collapsed before the dynastic period began. Climate change, environmental shifts, resource depletion, any of these could have caused a societal collapse, scattering populations and erasing most traces of their achievements. What would remain? Stone structures, prepared bedrock, erosion patterns, fragments of knowledge transmitted orally or symbolically, not enough to reconstruct the culture, but enough to know it existed. This brings us to a broader question about human history. How far back does organized civilization extend? The conventional answer is roughly 5,000 to 6,000 years. Sumerian cities emerged around 4,500 BC. Egyptian unification occurred around 3100 BC. The Indus Valley civilization flourished around 2500 BC. But these dates represent the beginning of recorded history of writing of cities that left extensive archaeological remains. They do not represent the beginning of human organizational capacity. Modern humans, anatomically and cognitively identical to us, have existed for at least 200,000 years. For most of that time, we assume humans lived in small nomadic groups, hunting, gathering, moving with the seasons. But evidence is emerging that challenges this assumption. Gebsepi in Turkey, dated to around 9600 BC, consists of massive stone pillars arranged in circles carved with intricate reliefs of animals. The site predates agriculture. It predates cities. It predates everything we thought necessary for monumental construction. Yet there it is undeniable, challenging our understanding of when and how humans began to organize, to build, to create lasting structures. Gebse suggests that the capacity for monumental architecture, for organized labor, for symbolic thinking existed far earlier than we assumed. If humans could build Gebse in 9600 BC, what else could they have built? What other structures might exist, buried, eroded, or misidentified? The Batit, African humid period spanning roughly the same era, transformed the Sahara into a habitable environment. Archaeological evidence from this period includes settlements, tools, rock art, and indications of complex social organization. But the archaeological record is incomplete. Much of the Sahara remains unexplored. Structures, if they exist, lie beneath sand, buried by millennia of climatic shift. Finding them requires resources, technology, and permission to excavate in politically sensitive regions. The work is slow, difficult, and underfunded. But the possibility remains that the Sahara, during its green phase, was home to cultures we have not yet discovered, cultures that may have contributed to the knowledge later applied in Egypt. This does not require a single lost super-civilization. It requires only that multiple cultures at different times in different regions achieved levels of sophistication that we have not fully recognized. These cultures rose, flourished, and declined. Some left stone structures, some left knowledge, some left nothing but myths and memories passed down through oral tradition until they became legends. Egypt may have inherited knowledge from several sources, from pre-dynastic cultures along the Nile, from Saharan groups displaced by climate change, from Eastern Mediterranean societies engaged in trade and exchange. The Fourth Dynasty did not invent everything from scratch. They synthesized, combined, and applied knowledge accumulated over millennia. This makes their achievement no less impressive. Synthesis is its own form of genius, the ability to take disparate elements, to integrate them into a coherent whole, to execute a plan at unprecedented scale. This is extraordinary. But it also means that the pyramid's origins are more complex than a single pharaoh, a single dynasty, a single generation. The textual traditions support this complex. Egyptian mythology speaks of the Zepi, the first time and era when gods walked the earth, when civilization was established, when knowledge was gifted to humanity. This first time is not historical in the modern sense. It is mythological, symbolic, a way of explaining origins that cannot be directly traced. But myths often contain kernels of truth. They preserve memories of real events, real people, real achievements, but encoded in symbolic language. If the septi reflects a memory of an earlier era, an era when knowledge flourished, when monuments were built, when civilization existed before the dynasties, then the mythology and the geological evidence align. The Sphinx, the prepared bedrock, the astronomical knowledge, all of it could be remnants of this earlier time. And the Egyptians, emerging in the dynastic period, inherited these remnants, honored them, and built upon them. This brings us to the question of transmission. How does knowledge survive across millennia? Writing is the most obvious method, but writing is fragile. Papyrus rots, clay tablets break, stone inscriptions erode. If a civilization collapses, If its cities are abandoned, if its people scatter, the written record can vanish within a few generations. Oral tradition is more resilient. Stories, songs, and rituals can preserve information across centuries, but oral tradition is also mutable. Each retelling introduces changes, details are lost, meanings shift. After 1,000 years, the story may bear little resemblance to the original. Another method is encoding. Knowledge can be embedded in structures, in measurements, in proportions. The Great Pyramid in this reading is not just a tomb or a monument. It is a repository. The alignment to true north encodes astronomical knowledge. The proportions encode pi, the dimensions encode the Earth's measurements. All of this information is preserved in physical form. It does not require writing. It does not require oral tradition. It simply exists waiting to be read by anyone with the tools to measure it. This method of preservation is elegant. It ensures that even if the culture collapses, even if the language is forgotten, even if the purpose is lost, the knowledge remains. Stone is durable. Geometry is universal. Mathematics does not depend on language or culture. Any sufficiently advanced society, encountering the pyramid, can measure it, analyze it, and extract the encoded information. This may be why the pyramid was built with such precision, not just to impress, not just to demonstrate power, but to communicate, to send a message across time to future generations who might need to know what was known. This is speculative, but it aligns with the structure's features, with its durability, with its precision, with its astronomical alignments, with the absence of clear textual explanation. If the pyramid is a message, it is a message. It is a message designed to outlast everything except the stone itself. The idea of ancient knowledge preserved across millennia, transmitted from culture to culture, is not new. It appears in mythology worldwide. Atlantis, described by Plato, was a civilization of great wisdom and power that sank beneath the sea. Whether Atlantis was real or metaphorical is debated, but the story reflects a common theme: that there were older, wiser cultures, that they possessed knowledge we have lost, that their collapse was sudden and catastrophic. Similar stories appear in Hindu texts, where cycles of creation and destruction repeat across vast epics, in Native American traditions, where oral histories describe great floods and upheavals, in Mesopotamian mythology, where the gods transmitted knowledge to humanity before withdrawing. These stories from disparate cultures separated by oceans and millennia share common elements: advanced knowledge, catastrophic loss, survival, and transmission. Are these myths merely symbolic, or do they preserve memories of real events, distorted by time but rooted in historical truth? Modern archaeology tends to dismiss these myths as fiction, but archaeology is limited by what survives. Stone, pottery, metal, these endure. Wood, fabric, papyrus, these decay. If a civilization built primarily with perishable materials, if it did not use stone for monumental construction, if its cities were located in regions now submerged or buried, then it might leave almost no archaeological trace. We would not know it existed unless we stumbled upon its remains by accident. The absence of evidence in such cases is not evidence of absence. It is simply evidence that we have not yet looked in the right places or recognized what we have found. The possibility that human history includes lost chapters, that civilizations rose and fell before recorded history began, does not require abandoning scientific rigor. It requires remaining open to evidence, to geological patterns that suggest pre-dynastic activity, to structures that predate the conventional timeline, to myths that align with observable facts, to the uncomfortable reality that our understanding of the past is incomplete and subject to revision. The Great Pyramid is evidence, not of aliens, not of magic, but of human capability, of knowledge that existed 4,500 years ago or earlier. Knowledge that we are still working to fully understand. The pyramid stands silent and enduring, a testament to achievements that challenge our assumptions about when, how, and by whom such feats were possible. So where does this leave us? The Great Pyramid was built. That is not in question. It exists. It has stood for over 4 millennia. But the how, the when, and the who remain areas of active debate. The conventional narrative attributes the pyramid to Khufu, to the 4th dynasty, to a workforce of tens of thousands laboring over 20 years with copper tools and wooden sledges. This narrative is supported by tradition, by inscriptions, by the Diary of Mia, and by the assumption that dynastic Egypt possessed the organizational capacity and motivation to complete such a project. But the narrative struggles with details, with a precision that exceeds the tools available, with a timeline that requires impossible speed, with the absence of written instructions, with the decline in quality after the 4th dynasty, with the geological evidence suggesting pre-dynastic site preparation. Each of these challenges can be addressed individually, but together they create doubt, not certainty, just doubt, the kind of doubt that invites deeper questioning. Alternative theories propose that the knowledge required to build the pyramid was inherited, that it came from an earlier source, a pre-dynastic culture, a lost civilization, or a long tradition of accumulated wisdom passed forward through generations. These theories explain the sudden appearance of advanced techniques. They explain the decline after the 4th dynasty. They explain the textual silence. They align with geological evidence and with the Egyptians' own inscriptions, which emphasize restoration and preservation rather than invention. But these theories are also incomplete. They lack direct evidence. They require civilizations for which we have limited archaeological confirmation. They ask us to accept that the past is deeper, older, and more complex than current models suggest. This is not easy. It challenges foundational assumptions. It requires revising timelines, rethinking narratives, acknowledging that our knowledge is provisional. The truth, whatever it is, lies in the stone, in the alignment, in the proportions, in the erosion patterns, in the subsurface anomalies, in the precision of the joints, in the silence of the texts. All of this is evidence, not proof but evidence, evidence that demands explanation. And the explanation, when it comes, must account for all the details, not just the convenient ones. It must explain why the oldest pyramid is the most advanced, why later dynasties could not replicate it, why the bedrock shows predynastic weathering, why the mathematics are so precise, why the texts are so silent. Until such an explanation emerges, we are left with questions, with mysteries, with a structure that stands at the boundary between what we know and what we do not. The Great Pyramid is not just a monument to the past. It is a challenge to the present, a challenge to remain curious, to question assumptions, to follow evidence wherever it leads, to accept that history, like the pyramid itself, is layered, complex, and deeper than it first appears. The pyramid will continue to stand. It will outlast our theories, our debates, our certainties, and perhaps that is its purpose, to endure, to wait, to remind us that there are achievements in the human past that we have not fully explained, that there is knowledge we have not yet recovered, that the story of civilization is longer, stranger, and more remarkable than we have been taught. The pyramid is not the end of the story. It is a beginning, a door that opens onto questions we're only now learning to ask. And beyond that door, in the deep past, in the foundations beneath the stone, in the knowledge encoded in proportion and alignment, there are answers that will reshape our understanding of who we are, where we came from, and what humans are capable of achieving when knowledge, vision, and determination align. The pyramid stands, the questions remain, and the search continues. The workforce question deserves deeper examination. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt around 450 BC, the Great Pyramid required 100,000 men working in 3-month shifts over 20 years. This account, recorded nearly 2,000 years after the pyramid's construction, is our primary historical source for the scale of labor involved. But Herodotus was not an eyewitness. He was repeating what Egyptian priests told him, and their information was already ancient, passed down through millennia of oral tradition. Can we trust these numbers? Archaeological evidence suggests something different. Workers' villages discovered near the pyramids, such as the one excavated at Hayat, perhaps a few thousand workers at most. These were not temporary camps, but permanent settlements with bakeries, breweries, and workshops. The workers were skilled craftsmen, not slaves. They were paid in food, beer, and goods. Graffiti left by work gangs shows pride in their labor. They named themselves things like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Men. These were organized teams competing with each other, taking pride in their contributions. This paints a very different picture from the massive slave labor force of popular imagination. But if only a few thousand workers were on site at any time, the construction timeline becomes even more problematic. Fewer workers means each worker must accomplish more. The productivity required becomes superhuman. Each worker would need to handle multiple blocks per day every day for years, and this does not account for specialization. Quarrying requires different skills than transporting. Transporting requires different skills than lifting. Lifting requires different skills than finishing. A construction project of this scale requires numerous specialized roles: foremen, surveyors, engineers, masons, laborers, cooks, water carriers, tool makers, administrators. Not everyone is moving stones, most are supporting those who are. So the number of people actually positioning blocks is smaller still. The mathematics become impossible unless the methods were far more efficient than we assume. Unless there were techniques, technologies, or organizational systems that dramatically reduce the labor required. But what could those be? Some researchers have proposed sonic levitation, using sound frequencies to reduce the effective weight of objects. This theory draws on accounts from various cultures, describing stones being moved through sound, through chanting, through instruments. In Tibet, legends speak of monks using drums and horns to levitate stones during construction. In South America, similar stories exist among indigenous groups, but these accounts are mythological, not scientific. No modern experiment has successfully levitate massive stones using sound. The physics do not support it. Sound waves can exert pressure, can move small objects under controlled conditions, but lifting multi-ton blocks remains firmly in the realm of speculation. Yet the persistence of these stories across unconnected cultures suggests they may be rooted in something real, perhaps not literal levitation, but a misunderstood technique that seemed magical to observers. Another theory involves electromagnetic properties of stone. Limestone and granite contain crystalline structures that can respond to electromagnetic fields. Some researchers proposed that the ancient builders understood these properties, that they use magnetic or electromagnetic forces to assist in moving blocks. This theory is supported by nothing. No ancient texts describe such methods. No ancient texts describe such methods. No archaeological evidence confirms the existence of electromagnetic devices. The theory requires technology that leaves no trace, which makes it unfalsifiable and therefore unscientific. It is more plausible to assume simpler methods, even if those methods remain unclear. Ropes, levers, ramps, sledges, these are known technologies. The question is not whether they were used, but how they were used efficiently enough to achieve the results we see. The internal architecture of the pyramid provides additional clues. The Grand Gallery is 28 feet high and 153 feet long. Rising at a 26 degrees angle, its corbelled walls step inward as they rise, creating a narrow ceiling. The walls are polished limestone, smooth and reflective in torchlight. Walking through this space today, even as a tourist, is awe-inspiring. The scale, the precision, the sense of intentional design, all of it speaks to purpose. But what purpose? Some researchers suggest the gallery served as a storage area for granite plug blocks. 3 massive blocks, that sealed the ascending passage after the pharaoh's burial. These blocks weighing several tons each would have been held in the gallery, then released to slide down and seal the passage, preventing entry into the king's chamber. This explanation is practical. It accounts for the gallery's size and angle, but it seems inadequate. Would the builders dedicate such effort, such architectural grandeur to mere storage? Or was the gallery itself part of the pyramid's function? A space designed to facilitate something we do not yet understand. The king's chamber measures 34 feet x 17 feet, with a height of 19 feet. The proportions are precise, the length exactly double the width, the height related to both through geometric ratios. The chamber is constructed from red granite blocks, each weighing tens of tons, fitted together without mortar. The walls are smooth, the corners square. Above the chamber, 5 layers of granite beams form relieving chambers, massive horizontal slabs designed to distribute weight away from the chamber below. This engineering is redundant, excessive even. The pyramid's mass alone would not collapse the king's chamber. But the builders took no chances. They created a system so robust that failure was impossible. This level of over-engineering suggests the chamber was critical, that its preservation mattered more than anything else. If the pyramid was simply a tomb, why such elaborate protection? Tombs can be replaced, bodies can be replaced, bodies can be reared. What could not be replaced? What had to be protected at all costs was the chamber itself, its dimensions, its alignment, its position within the structure. This suggests the chamber served a function beyond housing a sarcophagus, a function tied to the pyramid's deeper purpose. The sarcophagus in the king's chamber is carved from a single block of red granite. It is lidless, unadorned, and too large to have been brought through the passages. This means it was placed in the chamber during construction before the roof was sealed. The interior is rectangular, the walls smooth, the corners square, the granite is hard, resistant to weathering, capable of lasting indefinitely. Yet the sarcophagus is empty. No mummy, no lid, no inscription identifying its intended occupant. Some researchers argue the mummy was stolen, the lid removed by grave robbers, but removing a granite lid weighing hundreds of pounds through narrow passages would be difficult. And why steal the lid, but leave the sarcophagus? If the goal was to loot grave goods, the lid is the least valuable item. The absence of a mummy of any organic remains is telling. Chemical analysis of the sarcophagus interior has found no trace of embalming materials, no residues of oils, resins, or spices used in mummification. If a body was ever placed in this sarcophagus, it left no trace. This absence raises the possibility that the sarcophagus was never used for burial, that its purpose was symbolic, ceremonial, or related to functions we do not understand. The Queen's chamber, located lower in the pyramid, presents its own mysteries. The name is a misnomer. There is no evidence that it was intended for a queen. The chamber is smaller than the king's chamber, with a pointed gabled ceiling. The walls are rough, unfinished in places, as though work was abandoned mid-construction. A niche is carved into the east wall, its purpose unknown. Some researchers suggest it was meant to hold a statue. Others propose it was a false door, a symbolic portal for the pharaoh's car or spirit to pass through. The chamber's positioning below the pyramid's central axis suggests it may have been part of an earlier design, later abandoned in favor of the king's chamber. This would indicate that the pyramid's internal layout evolved during construction, that the builders changed their plans midway through. Such changes are common in large projects, but they complicate our understanding. If the design evolved, if decisions were made on the fly, it suggests the builders were experimenting, adapting, solving problems as they arose. This is not the behavior of a civilization executing a perfected blueprint. It is the behavior of a civilization working through challenges, learning as they build. The ventilation shafts, narrow passages running from both the king's and queen's chambers to the pyramid's exterior, add another layer of complexity. For years, these were assumed to be air shafts, providing ventilation during construction. But robotic exploration has revealed that the shafts from the Queen's Chamber do not exit the pyramid. They terminate in small blocked sections, deep within the structure. Behind these blocks, explorers found tiny chambers containing mysterious objects, copper fittings, wooden handles, small stone balls. The purpose of these objects is unknown. They may be symbolic tools for the pharaoh's afterlife journey, or they may be functional components of a mechanism we do not recognize. The shafts themselves are precisely angled. The northern shaft from the king's chamber points toward the pole star. The southern shaft points toward Orion's belt. These alignments are not accidental. They reflect deliberate astronomical orientation. But why? If the pyramid is a tomb, why align shafts to stars? The most common explanation is ritual. The pharaoh's soul was believed to ascend to the stars to join the gods in the heavens. The shafts facilitated this journey, serving as symbolic pathways, but this explanation feels incomplete. Symbolic pathways do not require physical precision. They can be approximate representative. The fact that these shafts are accurately aligned suggests they served a practical function, one that depended on exact orientation. Some researchers propose that the pyramid functioned as an astronomical observatory, that the shafts allowed precise measurements of stellar positions, tracking the movement of stars over time, compiling astronomical data that could be used for calendars, navigation, or religious purposes. This theory aligns with evidence of advanced astronomical knowledge in ancient Egypt. The Egyptian calendar, one of the earliest in history, was based on the heliacal rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. This event, which occurred annually around the time of the Nile's flood, marked the beginning of the new year. Predicting this event required careful observation, long-term recordkeeping, and mathematical calculation. If the Egyptians could predict the rising of Sirius, they could certainly track other celestial movements. The pyramid, with its precise alignments and internal shafts, could have served as a tool for such work. But again, once the pyramid was sealed, the shafts were inaccessible. The observatory, if that is what it was, could only function during construction. After completion, it became a monument, a permanent record of astronomical knowledge encoded in stone. The alignment of the three main pyramids at Giza adds another dimension. The pyramids are not randomly placed. They are positioned in a deliberate pattern, forming a diagonal line across the plateau. Some researchers note that this alignment corresponds to the three stars in Orion's belt, the central feature of the Orion constellation. This correlation, known as the Orion correlation theory, was popularized by Robert Boville in the 1999. According to Boville, the pyramids were designed to mirror the stars, creating a terrestrial representation of the celestial pattern. The Nile River in this interpretation corresponds to the Milky Way. The entire Giza complex becomes a map of the heavens built in stone. Critics argue that the alignment is not exact, that the pyramids do not match the stars as precisely as the theory suggests. They point out that slight differences in positioning, in scale, and in orientation undermine the correlation. But supporters counter that the alignment is close enough to be intentional, that ancient builders working without modern instruments could not achieve perfection, and that the symbolic connection is what matters. Whether the Orion correlation theory is accurate or not, it reflects a broader truth. The ancient Egyptians were deeply connected to the stars. Their mythology, their religion, their calendar, all of it revolved around celestial cycles. Building monuments that reflected this connection would be entirely consistent with their worldview. The Sphinx, as discussed earlier, presents its own set of questions. The body is carved from limestone bedrock, part of the plateau itself. The head is proportionally small, leading some researchers to suggest it was recarved. If the original head was larger, perhaps representing a lion, it would have been more proportionate to the body. Recarving would explain the wear patterns, the erosion, and the disproportionate size. But recarving also raises questions. Who did the original carving when, and why recar it into a pharaoh's face? The conventional answer is that the Sphinx was carved during the 4th dynasty. Contemporary with the pyramids, the face is thought to represent Khafre, the pharaoh associated with the second pyramid. But the erosion patterns suggest greater age. If the Sphinx is older, significantly older, then it predates the pharaohs. It becomes a remnant of an earlier era, later claimed and modified by the Egyptians. This aligns with inscriptions describing pharaohs restoring the Sphinx, clearing sand, repairing damage. They treated it as something ancient, something they inherited rather than created. The Dreams site, aly erected by Thutmose IV, between the Sphinx's paws, describes the prince clearing sand from the monument after the Sphinx appeared to him in a dream. The inscription presents the Sphinx as a conscious entity capable of communication deserving of reverence. This is not the language used for a statue carved a few centuries earlier. This is the language used for something mythological, something ancient, beyond memory. If the Egyptians themselves believed the Sphinx predated their civilization, then perhaps it did. Perhaps it stood on the plateau long before the first pyramids rose, a guardian from an earlier age, watching over a landscape that would eventually become the most famous archaeological site in the world. The broader context of megalithic construction worldwide adds perspective. Egypt is not unique in building massive stone structures. Stonehenge in England, dated to around 3000 BC, consists of multi-ton sarsen stones transported from quarries miles away. Karnak in France features thousands of standing stones arranged in rows, their purpose unknown. In South America, Sacayan in Peru consists of massive polygonal stones fitted together with extraordinary precision, some weighing over 100 tons. Pumapunku in Bolivia features precisely cut undite blocks, some with complex interlocking joints that suggest advanced stonework techniques. Across the world, in different cultures at different times, humans built with stone on scales that challenge modern understanding. These structures share common features: massive blocks, precise fitting, astronomical alignments, absence of clear written instructions, decline in construction quality over time. The pattern is consistent. It suggests that megalithic construction was not an isolated phenomenon, but a widespread practice, one that involved knowledge systems we have not fully recovered. Some researchers propose a global network, arguing that these structures were built by a single ancient civilization with worldwide reach. This theory is speculative, controversial, and not supported by mainstream archaeology. But it raises interesting questions. Why do unconnected cultures, separated by oceans and millennia, produce similar results? Is it convergent evolution, different societies independently developing similar techniques, or is it diffusion, knowledge spreading through trade, migration, or contact? The conventional answer is convergent evolution. Humans given similar problems and similar resources develop similar solutions. Stone is durable. Building with it makes sense. Aligning structures to celestial markers serves practical purposes. Precision is valued across cultures, but convergent evolution does not explain the decline in quality. If societies independently developed megalithic techniques, those techniques should improve over time. Instead, they degrade. The older structures are often the most advanced. This pattern, visible in Egypt and elsewhere, suggests something beyond independent development. It suggests transmission, knowledge passed from one culture to another, applied, then gradually lost. Trade networks in the ancient world were more extensive than commonly assumed. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan has been found in Egyptian tombs. Tin, necessary for bronze production, was imported from as far as Cornwall in England. Obsidian from the Mediterranean appears in sites across the Near Feeds. These materials traveled thousands of miles, passing through numerous hands, facilitated by networks of traders, merchants, and intermediaries. If materials could travel such distances, so could ideas. A skilled mason from one region could visit another, bringing techniques, knowledge, and innovations. A trader could describe construction methods seen abroad. A refugee fleeing conflict could carry knowledge to a new land. Cultural contact, even in the ancient world, was more common than we assume, and with contact comes the possibility of knowledge transfer. This brings us to the question of where the original knowledge came from. If the Egyptians inherited techniques rather than inventing them, who did the inventing them? One possibility is that the knowledge developed gradually over millennia, accumulated through trial and error by countless cultures, each contributing incremental improvements. By the time the knowledge reached Egypt, it had been refined to the point where it seemed perfect, fully formed. This explanation is plausible. It accounts for the sophistication without requiring a single lost civilization. But it requires a long, unbroken chain of transmission. It requires that knowledge passed from generation to generation, culture to culture, without significant loss. This is difficult. Knowledge erodes, techniques are forgotten, cultures collapse. For knowledge to survive across such spans of time, it must be valued, protected, encoded in ways that resist loss. Another possibility is that the knowledge originated with a specific culture, one that achieved remarkable sophistication, then collapsed. The survivors of this collapse dispersed, carrying fragments of knowledge to new regions. Egypt, in this scenario, is one of several inheritors. The knowledge arrived already advanced, already refined, and the Egyptians applied it during the Fourth Dynasty. But without the full intellectual foundation, without understanding why the techniques worked, they could not sustain them. Over generations, the knowledge faded. This theory aligned with the declining quality. It explains the sudden appearance of advanced techniques. It accounts for the textual silence, but it lacks direct evidence. We have not found the ruins of this original culture. We have not excavated their cities or read their texts. If they existed, they left traces so subtle that we have not recognized them. Or their remains lie in regions we have not yet explored, beneath oceans that rose when the Ice Age ended, under deserts that buried them in sand, in landscapes transformed by millennia of geological and climatic change. The end of the last Ice Age, roughly 11,000 to 12,000 years ago, brought dramatic changes. Sea levels rose by hundreds of feet as glaciers melted. Coastlines shifted. River valleys flooded. Entire landscapes were submerged. If advanced cultures existed during the Ice Age, if they built cities along coastlines that are now underwater, their remains would be difficult to find. Underwater archaeology is expensive, dangerous, and technically challenging. Most of the world's coastlines remain unexplored. Ruins, if they exist, lie beneath sediment, covered by millennia of accumulated material. Finding them requires resources, technology, and luck, but occasionally discoveries hint at what might be out there. Submerged structures off the coast of India, Japan, and the Mediterranean have been reported. Their origins debated. Some are natural formations, others show signs of human modification. None have been definitively identified as remnants of Ice Age civilizations, but the possibility remains. The flooding that accompanied the end of the Ice Age may also explain the prevalence of flood myths worldwide. Nearly every ancient culture has a story of a great flood, a deluge that destroyed the world, leaving only a few survivors. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest written stories, describes a flood sent by the gods to wipe out humanity. The biblical story of Noah's Ark is similar. Hindu texts describe cycles of destruction by water. Greek mythology includes the story of Deucalion and Pyrrhusol, survivors of a flood sent by Zeus. Native America, baking traditions, Australian Aboriginal stories, Polynesian legends, all describe great floods. These stories share common elements: rising water, divine wrath, a small group of survivors, the rebuilding of civilization. Are these myths simply symbolic, representing chaos, and renewal, or do they preserve memories of real events? If sea levels rose rapidly at the end of the Ice Age, coastal populations would have experienced catastrophic flooding. Settlements would have been inundated. People would have fled inland carrying memories of the disaster. Over generations, these memories would become stories, then myths, their details distorted, but their core truth preserved. The flood in this interpretation is real. The specifics, the divine intervention, the global scope, are exaggerations, but the kernel of truth remains. If flood myths preserve memories of real events, then other myths might as well. Stories of lost civilizations, of golden ages, of times when gods walked among men. These might not be pure fantasy. They might reflect historical realities, events and cultures that existed long before recorded history began. The challenge is separating fact from fiction, identifying which details are accurate and which are symbolic. This is difficult. Myths do not follow historical conventions. They do not cite sources or provide dates. They are stories shaped by cultural values, by religious beliefs, by the needs of the societies that tell them. But they are not without value. They are data points, fragments of memory, clues that can guide research and exploration. When multiple myths from unconnected cultures share common themes, those themes warrant investigation. The flood is one such theme. Lost knowledge is another. The idea that humanity once possessed wisdom it no longer has, that civilization rose to great heights, then fell, leaving only remnants. This appears in myth, ages worldwide. The Greeks spoke of ages of gold, silver, bronze, and iron, each successive age less virtuous than the last. Hindu cosmology described cycles of yugas, epics that span millions of years, each ending in destruction and renewal. These stories suggest a worldview where progress is not linear, where civilizations rise and fall, where knowledge is gained and lost repeatedly. Modern Western thought, by contrast, assumes progress is inevitable, that humanity moves steadily from ignorance to enlightenment, from primitiveness to sophistication. But this view is recent, a product of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. For most of human history, cultures understood time as cyclical. They saw civilizations collapse, witnessed knowledge vanish, and recorded these observations in myth and legend. Perhaps they were right. The pyramid stands as a challenge to linear progress. It appears at the beginning of Egyptian monumental architecture, fully formed, extraordinarily advanced. It is not the culmination of a long developmental process. It is the starting point. Everything that comes after is lesser. This inverts our expectations. It suggests that history, at least in this case, moved backward, that the Egyptians began with something remarkable and spent the next 2 millennia trying to recapture what they had lost. This is not how civilizations are supposed to work, but it is what the evidence shows. The evidence does not lie. The stones are precisely cut. The alignment is accurate. The mathematics are encoded. The later pyramids are inferior. These are facts observable and measurable. The question is what conclusions we draw from them. The conventional answer is that the 4th dynasty was an anomaly, a brief golden age when everything came together perfectly. Skilled leadership, abundant resources, favorable conditions, and after Khufu, these conditions deteriorated, leading to decline. This answer is possible. History is full of brief golden ages, periods when civilizations achieve greatness before descending into chaos. But the answer feels incomplete. It does not account for the textual silence. It does not explain the geological evidence. It does not address the decline in stoneworking quality that extends beyond pyramids to all aspects of Egyptian craftsmanship. The pattern is too consistent, too widespread to be explained by a single generation's good fortune. The alternative answer is inheritance. The 4th dynasty inherited knowledge from an earlier source. They applied it, built the Great Pyramid, but did not fully understand it. When the generation that possessed this knowledge died, The knowledge died with them. Later dynasties attempted to continue the tradition, but they were working from memory, from incomplete instructions, from ritual rather than understanding. They produced pyramids that looked similar but lacked the precision, the scale, the structural integrity of the original. Over time, even these attempts faded. By the New Kingdom, pyramid construction had ceased. Pharaohs were buried in hidden tombs in the Valley of the Kings, not in monumental pyramids on open plateaus. The shift reflects changing priorities, changing beliefs, but also the recognition that the old methods were no longer accessible. The knowledge was gone. What remained were the pyramids themselves, silent and enduring, monuments to a capability that had been lost. This interpretation does not require abandoning science. It requires following the evidence honestly. It requires acknowledging that human history is more complex than textbooks suggest. It requires accepting that civilizations rise and fall, that knowledge can be lost, that the past is not a steady march toward the present. The Great Pyramid is not an endpoint, a marker, a point in time when knowledge was applied with precision and purpose. Before it lies a deeper past, one we are only beginning to explore. After it lies a long decline, a gradual loss of understanding that would take millennia to reverse. We are the beneficiaries of that reversal. Modern science, modern engineering, modern mathematics, these are tools that allow us to measure the pyramid, to analyze its features, to ask questions about its origins. We can see what the ancient Egyptians accomplished. We can marvel at it, but we cannot yet fully explain it. And perhaps that is as it should be. Some mysteries resist easy answers. Some achievements stand beyond our ability to replicate, not because we lack the tools, but because we lack the context. We do not know what it was like to live in the Fourth Dynasty, to inherit knowledge from an even older past, to build under the shadow of something greater. We can only look at what remains, the stone, the alignment, the silence and wonder. So we return to the beginning. The Great Pyramid was built. That much is certain, but by whom, how, and why remain questions without definitive answers. The conventional narrative provides a framework, a way of understanding the pyramid within the context of ancient Egyptian history. But the framework has gaps, places where the evidence does not quite fit, where the timeline feels compressed, where the precision exceeds the supposed capabilities of the builders. These gaps are not fatal to the conventional narrative. They are simply uncomfortable. They invite questioning. They demand that we look more closely, think more carefully, and remain open to possibilities we might otherwise dismiss. The pyramid is not going anywhere. It will stand for thousands of years more, outlasting our theories, our debates, our certainties, and in that endurance it fulfills its purpose, to survive, to preserve, to remind us that human history is deeper, stranger, and more remarkable than we have been taught. The stone remembers, and we, if we are wise, will listen to what it has to say. The mathematical precision encoded in the pyramid's dimensions reveals layers of knowledge that challenge our assumptions about ancient capabilities. Beyond the pi ratio already discussed, the pyramid contains other mathematical relationships that suggest sophisticated understanding. The slope angle of the pyramid, approximately 51 degrees and 52 minutes, creates a specific geometric relationship. This angle produces a sekhed, an ancient Egyptian measure of slope of exactly 5.5 palms per cubit. This ratio was standard in Egyptian architecture, but in the Great Pyramid it produces something remarkable. The slope angle creates a structure where the height and base dimensions relate through the golden ratio phi, approximately 1.6 and 18. This number, like pi, is a mathematical constant that appears throughout nature in spirals in the proportions of living things and the structure of galaxies. The Greeks discovered phi and considered it aesthetically perfect. The Renaissance architects used it deliberately in their designs. Yet the Great Pyramid, built supposedly by a civilization without advanced mathematical notation, encodes it in stone. The debate over whether this encoding is intentional or coincidental has raged for decades. Skeptics argue that any structure of sufficient complexity will contain numerous mathematical relationships when analyzed thoroughly. That if you look hard enough, you can find pi and other constants in almost anything. This argument has merit. Pattern recognition is a human trait. We see faces in clouds, meaning in randomness. But the pyramid's proportions are not random. They're consistent, reproducible, and appear across multiple measurements. The ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to its height, the ratio of the epithem, the distance from the apex to the midpoint of a base side, to half the base length, the relationship between the pyramid's volume and the volumes of its internal chambers. All of these contain mathematical constants or relationships that suggest deliberate design. Dismissing all of them as coincidence requires ignoring cumulative probability. One coincidence is likely, two are possible. But when multiple mathematical relationships appear in a single structure, all producing recognized constants, the probability of accident decreases dramatically. The pyramid's geographic position adds another layer of mathematical significance. It sits at 297.92 degrees north latitude. This number, when expressed in meters, is 29th in 97/200, which corresponds closely to the speed of light in meters/s 299,792,458. This correlation has been noted by several researchers, though mainstream archaeology dismisses it as numerological coincidence. The speed of light was not measured accurately until the 19th century. The meter itself was not defined until the French Revolution, based originally on a fraction of the Earth's circumference. So any correlation between the pyramid's latitude and the speed of light, expressed in meters, involves measurement systems that did not exist when the pyramid was built. The correlation appears meaningful only in retrospect when we apply modern units to an ancient structure. But even granting this objection, the correlation is striking. It raises questions about what the pyramid's builders might have known, what they might have encoded intentionally, and what connections remain hidden in the structure's dimensions. Waiting for measurement systems we have not yet invented. The cubit, the primary unit of measurement used in ancient Egypt, adds another dimension to the mathematical puzzle. The Egyptian royal cubit was approximately 52.4 centimeters. This unit appears throughout the pyramid's dimensions. The king's chamber measures exactly 1020 royal cubits. The height of the grand gallery is 28 cubits. The length of the pyramid's base is 440 cubits. These are not approximate measurements. They are precise, indicating that the cubit was standardized consistently across the entire project. But the cubit itself may encode knowledge. When the royal cubit is multiplied by certain factors, it produces measurements that correspond to astronomical distances, planetary radii, and other cosmic dimensions. Some researchers proposed that the cubit was not just a construction unit, but a knowledge system, a way of encoding cosmic ratios in a form that could be transmitted and preserved. This theory is speculative. It requires that the pyramid's builders understood cosmic dimensions at a level that seems impossible. But the theory accounts for why the cubit, when analyzed mathematically, produces such remarkable correlations. The ventilation shafts deserve further examination. Modern robotic explorations have mapped these shafts in detail, revealing features that were invisible to earlier researchers. In 2002, a robot equipped with a camera explored the southern shaft of the Queen's chamber. It encountered a block with two copper fittings like handles. The robot drilled through the block and discovered a small chamber beyond containing another block with similar fittings. This discovery sparked intense speculation. Were the blocks doors? Were they seals? Did they protect something valuable? In 2011, another robot explored the shaft, using fiber optic cameras to examine the space beyond the second block. It found hieroglyphic symbols, red paint marks left by the original builders. These marks are rare in the Great Pyramid. Most of the interior is unmarked, anonymous. The presence of hieroglyphs in this hidden shoe, amber, suggests significance, but the marks are unclear, difficult to interpret. They may be masons' marks identifying work gangs, or they may be something more, instructions, dates, or symbolic messages left for reasons we do not understand. The northern shaft of the Queen's chamber presents similar mysteries. It too terminates in a block, beyond which lies an unknown space. No exploration has yet penetrated this block. The shaft remains sealed, its secrets intact. Some researchers propose that these shafts were never meant to be opened, that they serve a symbolic function, pathways, for the pharaoh's spirit to travel between the chamber and the outside world. But if the function is purely symbolic, why the physical blocks? Why the copper fittings? Why the care taken to seal these passages? The effort suggests that something lies beyond the blocks, something the builders wanted to protect or preserve. Whether that something is physical, a cache of objects, or symbolic, a space left intentionally empty as a ritual void, remains unknown. What is clear is that the shafts are not simple ventilation passages. They are designed features carefully constructed, sealed with purpose. They are part of the pyramid's hidden architecture, the aspects of the structure that remain inaccessible, unexplored, and deeply mysterious. The subterranean chamber carved into the bedrock beneath the pyramid is another enigmatic feature. This chamber sits at the end of the descending passage, over 100 feet below ground level. It is rough, unfinished, with an irregular floor and incomplete walls. In the center of the floor, a shaft descends even deeper into the bedrock, but goes nowhere. It simply ends a pit without purpose. The conventional explanation is that the subterranean chamber was the original burial chamber, later abandoned in favor of the king's chamber, higher in the pyramid. The roughness, the unfinished state, supports this interpretation. But questions remain: why carve a chamber so deep into the bedrock only to abandon it? The effort required to excavate this space, to remove tons of limestone, to create passages and chambers deep underground, is enormous. Abandoning such work midway seems wasteful, inefficient, unless the chamber served a different purpose, unless it was never meant to be finished. Some researchers propose that the subterranean chamber is symbolic, representing the underworld, the realm of the dead. In Egyptian mythology, the deceased journey through the underworld, facing trials before reaching the afterlife. The subterranean chamber deep beneath the earth could represent this realm, a physical manifestation of mythological space. But this explanation remains speculative, unsupported by inscriptions or explicit references in Egyptian texts. The construction techniques used in the pyramid continue to puzzle researchers. Modern engineers have attempted to replicate ancient methods using period-appropriate tools and materials. Some experiments have succeeded. In the 1990s, a team led by Mark Lanner built a small pyramid using copper tools, wooden sledges, and manual labor. The project took several weeks and required about a dozen workers. The pyramid was roughly 20 feet high, a fraction of the Great Pyramid. The experiment demonstrated that ancient techniques could work, that stone could be cut, moved, and stacked using simple tools. But the experiment also revealed limitations. The pace was slow, the precision was difficult to maintain, the wear on tools was significant. Extrapolating from the small pyramid to the Great Pyramid, the team estimated that building the full structure would require not 20 years, but closer to 50 or 60 years, assuming a workforce of several thousand. This timeline conflicts with the conventional 20-year estimate, suggesting that either the workforce was much larger than evidence indicates, or the methods were more efficient than experiments have been able to replicate. Another experiment conducted in Japan attempted to lift a 70-ton stone using ancient techniques. The team constructed wooden sleds, ramps, and lever systems employing hundreds of workers pulling ropes. The project succeeded in moving the stone short distances, but struggled with precise positioning. The stone, once in motion, was difficult to control. Small adjustments required immense effort. The experiment concluded that lifting 70-ton blocks to a height of 140 feet and positioning them with millimeter precision would be extraordinarily difficult, perhaps impossible, using only manual labor and simple tools. The researchers proposed that additional techniques must have been used, techniques not visible in the archaeological record. These might include advanced rope systems, counterweight mechanisms, or methods involving water and buoyancy. But without direct evidence, these remain hypotheses, educated guesses based on what seems necessary to achieve the observed results. The internal passages of the pyramid present their own engineering challenges. The ascending passage is narrow, low, requiring visitors to stoop or crawl. Moving large stones through this passage would be nearly impossible. Yet the king's chamber, accessible only via the ascending passage and grand gallery, contains the largest stones in the pyramid. The granite beams forming the ceiling weigh 50 to 70 tons each. How are they positioned? The conventional answer is that the chamber was built first, the beams placed, and then the surrounding structure was erected, encasing the chamber in stone. This method makes sense for the king's chamber, but creates logistical challenges. It means the builders had to plan the chamber's exact location before construction began, had to ensure that the passages aligned correctly, and had to coordinate the placement of external and internal stones with perfect precision. Any error, any misalignment would make the passages inaccessible. Trapping the internal chambers, the level of planning required, the foresight, the precision, all suggest a sophisticated understanding of three-dimensional design, of spatial relationships, of structural engineering. This is not the work of trial and error. This is the work of trained professionals executing the carefully designed plan. The Grand Gallery's function remains one of the pyramid's enduring mysteries. Most explanations focus on practical uses: storage for plugged blocks, a processional space, an acoustic chamber. But some researchers propose more speculative functions. One theory suggests the gallery was part of a water-based lifting system where water filled the gallery, creating buoyancy that reduced the effective weight of stones, allowing them to be floated into position. This theory requires that the gallery be sealed, watertight, capable of holding large volumes of water under pressure. There is no evidence for this. The gallery's walls show no signs of water damage, no residues, no mineral deposits that would accumulate from repeated flooding. Another theory proposes that the gallery functioned as a resonance chamber where sound waves were amplified and focused, creating vibrations that somehow assisted in moving stones. This theory draws on anecdotal accounts of acoustic levitation of stones moved by sound, but again, no scientific evidence supports it. The acoustics of the gallery are unusual. Yes, the space amplifies certain frequencies, creates echoes, produces effects that are audible and measurable, but there is no mechanism by which sound could lift multi-ton stones. The physics do not work. The external casing stones, most O, which were removed in the medieval period, once formed a smooth, continuous surface. Contemporary accounts describe the pyramid as dazzling, reflecting sunlight so brightly that it could be seen from miles away. The surface was polished to a mirror finish, the joints between stones so tight that observers could not insert a knife blade between them. This level of craftsmanship required not just cutting and shaping, but grinding and polishing. Each casing stone had to be finished individually, its surfaces perfected before being transported to the pyramid and lifted into place. The effort involved is staggering. The pyramid originally had over 100,000 casing stones. Each one required hours, perhaps days, of finishing work. The total labor, the cumulative effort across all casing stones, represents a significant portion of the pyramid's construction time. Modern stonemasons estimate that finishing a single casing stone to the precision visible in surviving examples would take one skilled worker about a week. Multiply that by 100,000 stones. and the timeline extends well beyond 20 years. Unless the work was divided among hundreds of skilled masons, all working simultaneously, all producing consistent results, the casing stones alone would require decades to complete. The removal of the casing stones, which began in the 13th and 14th centuries, was itself a massive undertaking. Following a major earthquake that loosened some of the stones, Cairo's rulers authorized their removal for use in building mosques, palaces, and other structures throughout the city. The ease with which the stones could be removed, compared to the difficulty of placing them, suggests that the joints, while extraordinarily tight, were not bonded with mortar or adhesive. The stones were held in place purely by weight and friction. This is remarkable. It means that for over 3,700 years, the casing's stones remained in position without any bonding agent, held by nothing more than their own mass and the precision of their fit. When the earthquake destabilized them, when the friction was reduced, they could be pried loose. But until that moment, they were as secure as if they had been glued. This is another testament to the builder's skill, their understanding of stone, of weight distribution, of how to create joints that would last for millennia. The pyramid's base, as mentioned earlier, is leveled to within less than an inch across 13 acres. Achieving this required surveying the bedrock, identifying high and low points, and then cutting the bedrock to create a flat surface. The Egyptians did this without laser levels, without digital theodolites, without any of the instruments modern surveyors rely on. The most likely method involved water-filling channels carved into the bedrock, using the water's surface as a level reference. Water naturally seeks its own level, providing a horizontal plane that can be used for measurement. By filling the channels marking the water level and then cutting the bedrock to match that level, the builders could create a flat surface. This method is simple, effective, and requires only basic tools, but it requires careful execution. The channels must be straight. The water must be still, undisturbed by wind or vibration. The measurements must be accurate, and the process must be repeated across the entire base, ensuring consistency. The fact that the base is not just approximately level, but extraordinarily level, deviating by less than an inch, suggests that the builders executed this process with exceptional care and precision. The Great Pyramid is not isolated. It exists within a broader landscape of monuments, structures, and sacred sites that together form the Giza complex. Understanding the pyramid requires understanding this context, the relationship between the three main pyramids, the Sphinx, the temples, the causeways, and the surrounding tombs. The layout of the complex is not random. It follows deliberate patterns, alignments that connect structures across distances, sight lines that link monuments to celestial events. Some researchers propose that the entire complex functions as a unified system, a terrestrial map of the heavens, a sacred landscape designed to mirror the cosmos. This interpretation aligns with Egyptian religious beliefs, which emphasized the connection between earth and sky, between pharaohs and gods, between mortal life and eternal existence. Building monuments that reflected celestial order would be entirely consistent with these beliefs. The second pyramid attributed to Khafra is slightly smaller than the Great Pyramid, but appears larger due to its position on higher ground. It retains some of its original casing stones at the apex, giving a glimpse of what the completed structure once looked like. The third pyramid attributed to Mena is significantly smaller, roughly a tenth the volume of the Great Pyramid. Its construction is also noticeably different. The lower courses use large granite blocks, while the upper courses use smaller limestone blocks. This change in materials and scale suggests a shift in resources, priorities, or capabilities. Khafra and Menara, the pharaohs associated with the second and third pyramids, did not match Khufu's achievement. Their pyramids are impressive, yes, but they are lesser. They represent continuation, not innovation. They suggest that the knowledge applied at the Great Pyramid was already fading by the time the second and third pyramids were built. The temples associated with the pyramid add another dimension to the complex. Each pyramid had a mortuary temple located on its eastern side, where rituals were performed. These temples connected to valley temples near the Nile via long causeways, raised stone paths that allowed priests and officials to travel between the river and the pyramid. The valley temple of Khafre, still partially intact, is built from massive limestone blocks, some weighing over 100 tons. The construction technique is similar to the pyramids, large blocks fitted together without mortar. The temple's interior is stark, simple, with granite columns and minimal decoration. The space feels monumental, designed to inspire awe. But like the pyramids, the temple raises questions. How are the massive blocks moved? How are they positioned? How was such precision? How was such precision achieved? The temple, like the pyramid, demonstrates capabilities that seem extraordinary for the period. The causeway connecting the valley temple to the pyramid was originally covered, forming a long enclosed corridor. Walking this path would have been a ceremonial experience, a journey from the mortal world, represented by the Nile and the valley temple, to the divine realm represented by the pyramid. The causeway's length, nearly half-o, Mal made the journey significant, a transition marked by distance and enclosure. Today, only fragments of the causeway remain, but its scale and purpose are clear. The entire complex, pyramid, temples, causeway was designed as a unity, a sacred landscape where architecture, ritual, and belief converged. The workers' village at Hate provides a window into the lives of those who built the pyramids. Excavations have revealed barracks, bakeries, breweries, fish processing facilities, and workshops. The workers were not slaves, but paid laborers fed and housed by the state. The food remains indicate a diet rich in protein, bread, beer, and meat, particularly beef. This is significant. Beef was expensive, a luxury food. The fact that workers received it suggests they were valued, their labor recognized and rewarded. The barracks show evidence of injury, treatment. Broken bones set and healed, indicating that medical care was provided. This is not how slaves are treated. This is how valued workers are treated. The evidence paints a picture of a well-organized, well-resourced project, one that required not just labor but care, planning, and respect for those doing the work. The graffiti left by work gangs provides another glimpse into the human side of the pyramid project. These inscriptions found in quarries and on blocks throughout the pyramid identify work teams by name. Names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Mena suggest camaraderie, competition, and pride. The workers saw themselves as participants in something important, something that would outlast them. They took ownership of their contributions, marking stones with their team's name, creating a record of their involvement. This sense of pride, of purpose, contradicts the image of miserable slaves forced to labor under brutal conditions. The workers were engaged, motivated, part of a collective effort that had meaning beyond mere construction. The question of motivation is important. Why did tens of thousands of people devote years of their lives to building a tomb for a pharaoh? The conventional answer is religious belief. The Egyptians believed the pharaoh was a god or the embodiment of a god responsible for maintaining cosmic order. By ensuring the pharaoh's safe passage to the afterlife, by building a suitable eternal dwelling, the workers were ensuring the stability and prosperity of Egypt itself. This belief, internalized deeply, would provide powerful motivation. But belief alone does not explain the organizational capacity, the logistical sophistication, the technological innovation required. Building the Great Pyramid required more than motivated labor. It required knowledge, expertise, systems for sea, ordinating thousands of workers, methods for quarrying and transporting stone, techniques for lifting and positioning blocks with precision. These elements cannot emerge spontaneously, even with strong motivation. They require training, tradition, accumulated experience. Where did this experience come from? If the Great Pyramid was the first large-scale pyramid, if it represented a sudden leap in ambition and capability, then the knowledge required could not have developed during the project. It must have existed beforehand. inherited from earlier projects, earlier traditions, earlier sources. The step pyramid at Saqqara, built for Pharaoh Joseph by the architect Imhotep around 2650 BC, is often cited as the transitional structure, the bridge between simple mustabas and the Great Pyramid. The step pyramid is indeed impressive. It rises in 6 tiers, reaching a height of 200 feet. Its construction represents ambition and innovation. But compare it to the Great Pyramid. The step pyramid uses smaller stones. Its internal structure is simpler. Its alignment is less precise. The leap from the step pyramid to the Great Pyramid, accomplished in roughly 1 generation, is extraordinary. The scale increases dramatically. The precision improves beyond recognition. The internal architecture becomes vastly more complex. This is not incremental progress. This is revolutionary change. Conventional explanations attribute this leap to Imhotep's genius, to innovations developed during Jose's reign, to refinements made during intermediate projects now lost or unrecognized. But the gap remains. The evidence of intermediate steps is absent. We move from the step pyramid to the Great Pyramid with almost nothing in between. The bent pyramid, built by Pharaoh Khufu's father, is sometimes offered as an intermediate step. This pyramid located at Dashur begins with one slope angle but changes midway, wide to a shallower angle, creating a distinctive bent profile. The change in angle suggests a structural problem, a realization mid-construction that the original slope was too steep, that the pyramid risked collapse. So the builders adjusted, flattened the upper portion, completed the structure safely. This indicates experimentation, problem-solving, learning through trial and error. But the bent pyramid, while instructive, does not fully bridge the gap. Its construction quality is good, but not exceptional. Its precision is adequate, but not extraordinary. The leap to the Great Pyramid still requires explanation. Some researchers proposed that Khufu built multiple pyramids, experimenting with different designs, refining techniques across several projects. The Red Pyramid, also attributed to Sneferu, supports this theory. It uses a consistent slope angle, avoids the problems of the bent pyramid, and represents a successful design. But even the Red Pyramid does not match the Great Pyramid's precision, scale, or complexity. The progression exists, yes, but it feels incomplete, as though key steps are missing, as though the knowledge applied at Giza came from somewhere beyond the immediate succession of Snu to Khufu. The question of timelines, of chronology, underlies many of these debates. The conventional dating of the pyramids relies on several lines of evidence. Inscriptions, cart, bearing pharaohs' names, found in quarries and on blocks. Radiocarbon dating of organic materials, wood and charcoal found in the pyramid's mortar, astronomical alignments that correspond to the night sky as it appeared circa 2500 BC, and historical texts, later king lists and chronicles that place Khufu in the 4th dynasty. Together, these lines of evidence support the conventional timeline, but each has limitations. Inscriptions can be added later. Cartes carved by later rulers claiming credit. Radiocarbon dating has margins of error, and the materials tested might not be contemporary with the construction. Astronomical alignments can correspond to multiple time periods, depending on the precision of the observation, and historical texts, written centuries or millennia after the events they describe, can contain errors, distortions, or propaganda. None of this invalidates the conventional timeline, but it means the timeline is not absolute. It is a best fit interpretation of available evidence, subject to revision if new evidence emerges. Alternative chronologies proposing that the pyramids are older than conventionally thought face significant challenges. They must explain why radiocarbon dates cluster around 2500 BC, why inscriptions mention 4th dynasty pharaohs, why no earlier texts reference the pyramids, why the architectural progression from mastabas to step pyramids to true pyramids appears in the conventional sequence. These are substantial obstacles, but alternative chronologies persist. because they address patterns the conventional timeline struggles to explain. The sudden appearance of advanced techniques, the decline in quality after the Fourth Dynasty, the geological evidence suggesting pre-dynastic site preparation. If the pyramids, or at least their foundations, are older than the Fourth Dynasty, then the evidence must be reinterpreted. The inscriptions become later additions. The radiocarbon dates reflect repairs or later use rather than original construction. The architectural progression becomes more complex, with the Fourth Dynasty inheriting and completing structures begun earlier. This reinterpretation is speculative, controversial, and not accepted by mainstream archaeology. But it remains a possibility, one that cannot be entirely dismissed without explaining all the anomalies it seeks to address. The inventory stela mentioned earlier is a key piece of evidence for alternative chronologies. This limestone stela, discovered in the 19th century near the Great Pyramid, contains an inscription describing Khufu finding the Sphinx and nearby temples already present, buried in sand. The stela dates to the 26th dynasty, over 2,000 years after Khufu's reign. Mainstream Egyptology dismisses it as a later invention, a pious fiction created by priests seeking to enhance the antiquity and sanctity of the site, but the stela's existence raises questions. Why invent such a story? What purpose does it serve? If the Fourth Dynasty built everything, why claim otherwise? One possibility is that the priests were recording genuine tradition, oral histories passed down from earlier generations, memories of a time when the structures were already ancient. Another possibility is that by the 26th dynasty, the true origins of the Sphinx and temples had been forgotten, and the priests filled the gap with speculation, with stories that seemed plausible given the monument's age and weathering. Either way, the stela reflects uncertainty, a recognition that the monument's origins were not entirely clear, even to the ancient Egyptians themselves. As we draw toward the close, it's worth reflecting on what we can say with certainty and what remains uncertain. The Great Pyramid exists. It is precisely constructed, astronomically aligned, mathematically sophisticated. It was built using stone, human labor, and organizational systems capable of coordinating thousands of workers across decades. The Egyptians used the pyramid, claimed it, maintained it, and honored it as a central monument of their civilization. These facts are undeniable, but the origins of the knowledge that made the pyramid possible, the methods used to achieve such precision, the timeline of construction, the purpose beyond royal burial, all of these remain areas of active debate. The evidence is incomplete. The textual record is silent on key details. The physical structure itself, while measurable, does not reveal all its secrets. We can analyze the stones, map the passages, calculate the proportions, but we cannot observe the construction. We cannot interview the builders. We cannot access the full context of knowledge, belief, and tradition that surrounded the project. What we are left with is interpretation. Multiple frameworks, each attempting to account for the evidence, each with strengths and weaknesses. The conventional framework rooted in mainstream Egyptology provides a coherent narrative, one that places the pyramid within the context of Egyptian history, explains it as the achievement of a specific pharaoh and dynasty, and attributes its construction to techniques and tools consistent with the archaeological record. This framework has the advantage of simplicity. It requires no lost civilizations, no radical revision of chronology, no appeals to unknown technologies. But it struggles with details, with the precision that exceeds the tools, with the timeline that requires impossible speed, with the decline that follows the Fourth Dynasty, with the silence of the texts. Alternative frameworks, whether proposing inheritance from earlier cultures, suggesting pre-dynastic site preparation, or advocating for revised chronologies, attempt to address these struggles. They propose more complex histories, longer timelines, knowledge systems that predate the dynasties. These frameworks have the advantage of explaining anomalies, but they require accepting evidence that is indirect, circumstantial, often contested. They require openness to possibilities that challenge foundational assumptions about the past. The Great Pyramid stands at the intersection of these frameworks, a structure that supports multiple interpretations, resists simple explanations, and invites ongoing inquiry. It is a monument to human achievement, yes, but it is also a monument to human mystery, to the gaps in our knowledge, to the limits of what we can reconstruct from stone and silence. Every generation approaches the pyramid with new tools, new methods, new questions, and every generation discovers something previous researchers missed. Some detail that have been overlooked, some measurement that reveals unexpected precision, some alignment that suggests deeper purpose. The pyramid is not a closed book. It is an open question, one that each generation must answer for itself, using the best evidence and methods available while remaining humble about the conclusions drawn. As the decades and centuries pass, as technology advances, as new discoveries are made in other parts of the world, our understanding of the Great Pyramid will continue to evolve. Perhaps we'll find definitive evidence of the methods used, inscriptions that describe the construction process, tools that bear traces of their use, experimental replications that successfully demonstrate ancient techniques at scale and precision. Perhaps we will discover pre-dynastic structures that bridge the gap, that show the progression from simple beginnings to the sophistication of Giza. Perhaps geological and climatic studies will clarify the timeline, confirming or revising the dates we currently accept. Or perhaps the pyramid will remain, as it has for over 4 millennia, a mystery that resists complete explanation, a monument that stands at the boundary of what we know and what we do not, a testament to human capability and to the humility we must maintain in the face of achievements we cannot fully replicate or explain. The Great Pyramid was built, that much is certain. By whom exactly, how, and why in such extraordinary fashion remain questions that invite continued exploration, debate, and wonder. The stone remembers the dimensions, preserve knowledge, the alignment points to the stars, and we, standing in its shadow, armed with the tools of modern science and the lessons of history, continue to ask, to measure, to theorize, and to marvel. The pyramid endures, the questions deepen, and the search, the endless human search for understanding, for connection to the past, for answers to mysteries that have outlasted empires. That search continues. It will continue long after we are gone, just as the pyramid itself will continue, silent and immense, holding its secrets close, waiting for the day when humanity finally possesses the wisdom and knowledge to fully understand what was achieved, how it was achieved, and what message, if any, was encoded in stone for us to discover.